Rachelle, would you say your schedule over Weed Week was more like a Schedule 1, or was it more like a schedule?
Oh, what a great transition. Should we talk about the news?
Let's talk about the news.
Yeah, we should do that. Yeah.
All right. So every so often on this podcast, which, I mean, let's be honest, every episode in this podcast, I say, it was a huge week. A lot of stuff happened. This week, a lot of stuff happened, both here in Minnesota, but especially federally looking at cannabis.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about two pretty major stories when you look at the status of cannabis here legally or decriminalizedly, or however you want to phrase it. And we're going to be talking about the changing of cannabis in scheduling, or at least the recommendation, and then also a bill that was introduced to legalize cannabis. So sort of the 1-2 punch of our federal government looking at how to reform cannabis.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, just right off the bat, like what were you hearing from the national scene regarding these announcements?
Well, it was funny because I was actually in a meeting when the AP kind of called it, right, quote unquote, that the DEA would, yes, be accepting the recommendation that the HHS put forward to move cannabis to Schedule 3 from Schedule 1. We were literally talking about it. We were all anticipating it, right? The whispers were getting louder, like it's happening.
Lots of anonymous sources.
Yes, exactly. And I was on the call. It was a sales call, actually, for the company I work for, and they were all whispering about it, and I was like constantly refreshing, waiting, and then it happened, and I was like, wait, you guys, it just happened. I gotta go. I gotta go file the story.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously then my inbox was inundated with opinions and thoughts. I mean, it was all over it. I would say it broke the weed internet, right?
Sure, right.
With a lot of opinions on all different sides.
Right. I mean, the push, well, let's get into it. So the Drug Enforcement Administration will propose moving the drug from a Schedule 1 substance, which includes heroin, meth, I mean, far more dangerous drugs than cannabis, down to Schedule 3, which is the category for regulated but legal drugs, includes testosterone, which is not a good comp, and Tylenol with codeine, which, again, I guess. Cannabis has been listed as Schedule 1 drug since 1971 under the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA, and even as many states have moved to legalize rec use more than a decade and medicinal use for even longer, we're still kind of stuck in this.
Yeah, it's always sort of been a joke having 50% of states have some sort of medical cannabis program. Well, federally, there's no medical value to it at all. And sort of being in this weird situation where the vast majority of the citizens in the U.S. were living in states with a medical cannabis program, but we all were living in a country that didn't even recognize that it had medicinal value.
And so many of the arguments are like, well, we just haven't studied it enough. But that's because you can't really study it very easily. So
it's also BS, not to interrupt, but there were over 10,000 studies done in the last 20, 30 years. So just saying 10,000 isn't enough. Okay.
No, nothing will be enough. I mean, the number of symptoms or the number of solutions that CBD and cannabis and hemp and marijuana can provide. I mean, it's boundless. It's remarkable how useful the plant is, and that's where the sensitivity around the plant comes in, is because it can provide so many solutions.
Yeah,
it's just been barred, and some folks are not even happy with Schedule 3. But moving cannabis to Schedule 3 would allow a more permissive approach to the drug, including permitting greater studies of medicinal uses and allowing related businesses to use a common tax deduction, which I understand why the accountants are happy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 280E, removing 280E makes this industry a lot more competitive.
Weed stocks were up 20% the day that this news came out, because so long we've talked about that 280E exemption, 280E being able to not allow people to write off rent, expenses related to the products that you're making. Suddenly now, at least when this finally goes through and is approved, might actually be able to be written off on your taxes.
Sure. So the existing market, the folks that are still in the business, are going to see a lot of relief through this proposed change, which is great.
There were some businesses paying upwards to 70% tax on their business, an insanely high amount, unlike any other industry. And it's because so much of it you just couldn't write off.
I mean, we haven't had a local accountant on, but I remember hearing that there's a way to be taxed even more than 100%. And what?
Yeah, it's impossible for any of these businesses to make money the way things stand. And so I feel like the 280E is definitely the biggest potential benefit from the rescheduling for sure, because now maybe companies can start to maybe make a profit. That would be interesting.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And we could see additional sort of like financial institutions begin to enter the market as it looks so much more stable and less like the rug could just get pulled out at any point. So perhaps credit card transactions in the cannabis industry, Minnesota might be one of the first states to really have stores open with that being a reality.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with Matt Cox from Dutchie a couple months ago, and like realizing that essentially what the Dutchies of the world, having conversations with the Visas of the world, what they were trying to do was essentially perform plastic surgery on this industry. They needed to get it to a place under the knife. They needed to make this change in order to allow it to fit into the financial banking system and the federal banking system. And, say what you want about these larger companies, but in order to get the ease of transactions that we're used to at the grocery store, it has to go through changes like this.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree that we want full legalization federally. We would love to see that increased open access. But is this a good step forward? Absolutely. I mean, it's good to see at least businesses begin to have more access, research perhaps be able to have more access. Should it be Schedule 3? No, but here we are.
Right. And that's like, we've been doing this podcast now 6 months together. It's cannabis is always getting the short straw. Like, it is just a part of culture. It's been 90 years of prohibition in some areas. Like, we're always going to be fighting for just a little bit, but a little bit over time makes a big difference.
I know what. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please. What were you going to say, Tanner?
Oh, I was going to say, I know what Marcus would say if he was here. So today we're recording. It's Marcus's birthday, so he wasn't able to make the recording.
Shout out, Marcus. Happy birthday.
Shout out, Marcus. Happy birthday. We'll sing to you at the end. I promise. Maybe. No. But what he would say is that it's so typical that the laws that are getting passed or the reforms that are happening federally are the ones that make it easier for businesses and not the ones that make it easier for expungement or reform or actual changes that need to happen. Yeah, it's great that Visa is entering the industry, but is that really what we needed to have happen?
Right. And that's literally what I was going to say, was that, I mean, let's not forget that there are still people in prison for this plant, and Schedule 3 does not change that. It does not free prisoners. It does not expunge cases. It does not stop the fact that adult use cannabis will still technically be illegal, according to the federal government. So, yeah, shout out, Marcus. We got the vibe for you today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's really sort of like a half step forward, if you can call it that.
If there's anyone at home playing bingo, we'll drop Prohibition Light here.
There we go. Bingo. We got the phrase. Well, so talking about legalization, because I think we can agree not enough, but we did see some pretty big legalization reforms reintroduced into the Senate. Now, this bill was previously, or at least a version of it, introduced into the Senate in the past. Now it's looking like it has some actual momentum to perhaps maybe begin moving forward. I've been burned so many times saying, this is it. This is the one. This will legalize it, or this will be the measure. So
can we just refer to Chuck Schumer as Charlie Brown here?
Yeah. So we saw the bill get introduced. One of the reasons that we're talking about it is one of the senators that signed on to it is Senator Tina Smith. So one of our local senators here in Minnesota, helping to lead that effort, along with 18 others, introduce that bill. So definitely has that momentum. What would legalization under this bill look like? Well, let's sort of talk about it. It would require cannabis to be removed from that Controlled Substances Act within 180 days. It would create a 5% sales tax on small to mid-sized cannabis, and then 10% on larger businesses, which would eventually get ramped up. So the 5% would go to 12.5%, 10% to 25%. So large businesses producing cannabis could face a 25% excess tax.
Wow.
It would expunge records of people with low-level federal cannabis convictions, while allowing those that are currently incarcerated to petition for relief. So it doesn't automatically grant it to them, but it would allow them to have a process for getting that done. States can choose still to prohibit cannabis, the production and sale of it within their state, but they cannot prevent people from moving through their state with it. So let's say you're in California and you want to sell something in Utah, and Nevada doesn't have it legal, which I know is not.
It'd be more like Illinois going to Ohio.
Yeah, and moving through to New York, they can drive through the state. They wouldn't be able to sell it in Ohio, but they would be able to use Ohio as a transportation.
Right.
So
I think Indiana's the one there. Like Indiana's the tough one there because Ohio did pass legalization. So it's like in the Midwest, we're dealing with Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this would.
States.
This is the example we should have gone with at the beginning. If a Minnesota brand wanted to sell in Michigan, Wisconsin couldn't prevent them from driving through the state. There we go.
That's why Minnesotans are not able to drive to Michigan to get cannabis because they'd have to come back through Wisconsin, and that's illegal.
Or you'd have to smoke it all there.
Or you would just call it THCA hemp because that's legit in Wisconsin.
There you go. You just need a COA that you can edit in the PDF editor and you're good to go. Well, it would do a number of other things. So it also would establish grant programs that fund nonprofits to provide job training or development in the industry. Also would fund legal aid. So while it wouldn't automatically allow people to get out of prison, it would create grant programs to help people provide services to get them out of prison. It would take away people's ability to be denied federal benefits because of possession or any conviction related to cannabis. It would ban federal drug testing, except with certain sensitive positions.
Sensitive.
Very sensitive.
Okay.
Physicians with the VA would be allowed to authorize it. Department of Transportation would study THC-infused driving and set a minimum that unfortunately all states would need to adopt. And then finally, vaping systems that contain any natural flavors or artificial flavors would be banned. So you wouldn't be able to add flavors to any vape cartridges.
I wonder if they would institute the oral test that Minnesota's working on.
Oh, good old Department of Transportation. Who knows? We should be getting that report January of next year, and we'll know if those devices work. Spoiler alerts.
They
don't. No. So what do you guys think? This is our first look, at least in this current incarnation, of what legalization could look like here in the United States. Do we like this version of legalization? What are some of our thoughts?
I mean, I think that this is way better than Schedule 3, like for sure, for a lot of different reasons, right? Like, I haven't spent much time with the act. I'm actually writing about it, so I need to do my homework. So this is a very good primer.
Perfect.
But I would be very interested in seeing, like, would it negate Schedule 3? Like, would it just cancel that out? Like, would it just, how would that work? I unfortunately don't see this passing. I hate to be a pessimist, but I feel like that's just the reality. But I do think that in a symbolic sort of way, it's really nice to see these points brought up. Like, this is what it could potentially look like. This is what maybe it should look like. I need to read more on it, but I do think that it's interesting to see bipartisan support always. My manager actually was asking me about this. He was like, it's kind of like daylight savings. Like, I think 100% of people agree that daylight savings should go away, but they still can't get that through Congress. This is the same thing.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I don't think like Joe Manchin is going to be signing on to this version of legalization this session. So I agree with you.
It sounds nice. It sounds okay. The 25% maximum tax, that's a chunk. And it kind of seems like Minnesota to some degree. Like there's some similarities here, but it'll take a while. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. I remember one of the first legalization bills being introduced here in Minnesota back in like the early aughts, and did not look anything like our program today, but at least started the conversation around not just legalization, but what does legalization look like? And I think even if this isn't the bill to make it passed, I'm at least excited that on that federal level, they're looking not just at what is legalization, but how we should actually legalize.
Right. Yeah, the expungement side. Yeah, the grant side, would love to see some of that come out.
Yeah. Well, so Washington was not the only people doing some legislating this week. Should we dig into some Minnesota news?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, so it's actually going on right now as we're talking. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be right back. And we're back. So we went and checked on the news, and guys, we're happy to report that the House file version of the OCM bill passed in the Senate, meaning that it's off to conference committee.
Amazing.
Very
What good
cool.
timing. Thank you, podcast and legislature.
I know it's crazy. Oftentimes news happens like a day or two after we record and then we release and everyone's like, why didn't you talk about this? And crazy that it literally happened on our break. People are going to think that we're joking about that, but it actually just passed while we took our break. So excited now to be able to talk about it. We don't have the full language here, but we can say that there were a number of measures that were introduced that did not make its way across the finish line. A lot of GOP amendments that were introduced, one including to raise the age of consumers to 25 here in our state, making us the highest of any state, or I guess not the
actually,
highest. Yeah, fortunately. But very fortunately, those measures did not pass. While we're still waiting for some of that final language, it looks like there might be early cultivation built into our program here in Minnesota.
We love that.
I mean, really, I think that is just Minnesota is primed in some ways to be one of the fastest growing markets. And if we can get early cultivation along with our home grow, we are in a really good place from a speed standpoint, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting to see how the bill sort of worked its way through the session, starting with perhaps some type of early licensure, moving on to like a pre-approval license, moving on to pre-approval with early cultivation, a number of other reforms. Definitely has a full CannOmnibus bill, that's for sure.
Hop on the bus.
Hop on the bus. So just like our little how did the bill become a law kind of thing, it's now headed to conference committee. What that means is that representatives and senators will get together. We'll have a small group of each that will talk about what changes we should approve. Now, the two bills, pretty similar in a number of their changes. The biggest that I think we can talk about is that the House one didn't include early cultivation. The Senate one does. But early licensure or that pre-approval was included in both. Reforms around medical programs was included in both. So likely it's just sort of be some of those minor things that are worked out in the end. But some of those major changes we know are likely going to make their ways to Governor Walz's desk.
Nice.
Well, we should say it does have to pass the Senate and the House again.
Yeah.
One more time after that conference committee report. But then we can say probably going to Governor Walz's desk.
How's the senator from Woodbury doing this week?
Such a great question. Well, she's in session. She's voting. Voting, in fact, on measures to try to kick her out of the Senate, saying no, and she's a deciding vote. So no. Bills move forward, including the cannabis bill. So excited to really be able to track that over the next couple of weeks, see where that goes. We only have a couple of weeks left in the session, so they got to keep working in those committees, getting that passed through. But sure, we can all remember from last year that conference committee process is a fun one.
Somebody buried the key. I'm getting thirsty. I'm sorry. I'm just
No, you're good. You're good. I do have one other bill that I want to talk about. John and I mentioned it last week when I was looking at just like starting to trickle out, but we now have it fully introduced and incorporated into the Health and Human Services budget bill. So we have this big cannabis measure, the one that we just talked about, moving its way through the House and Senate. But of course, you can include cannabis-related provisions in other legislation. And we saw a health measure related to cannabis be introduced into the Health and Human Services budget bill. Now, this bill is almost certain to pass. It's sort of one that's required to, fund our state government. So likely the provisions that are put in this are going to be voted on by legislators. In fact, we've talked to some people in the House and Senate, and they've said this bill, they can't vote against the bill. They can introduce amendments, but if this language is in the final version, their hands are tied. They're voting for that language. And we saw some language that could potentially be harmful to our cannabis program here in Minnesota. So it would ban the inclusion of artificial, synthetic, or natural flavors to any vaporizable product. It would also ban, and I think introducing flavors, I think we can all say, we don't want like random chemicals added to our vapes. We do like cannabis terpenes. We do like other botanical terpenes used in that. But I understand, from a safety perspective, maybe wanting to limit what goes into them. The rest of the bill, I really, really struggle with, though. So it would also ban any descriptors, smells, or tastes that would imply to an ordinary person that the product contains flavors other than the natural taste or smell of cannabis. So I've smelled products before that I went, wow, no way that's what cannabis smells like. But it is. It's a plant that has so many smells. And it's written that if any ordinary person would smell it and go, yeah, I don't think that's cannabis, that product is illegal.
Huh.
Further beyond that, it also would say that if the name of a product or the strain that it has includes a descriptor of fruit, a flavor, or any food term, that specific language has to only be on the packaging in 6-point font in either black or white. So let's say you have Blueberry Cupcakes vape cart. The part that says Blueberry Cupcakes could be in no larger than 6-point font and could only be in black or white. The rest of it can do whatever, but as long as it has a food or a fruit, unfortunately can't do that.
No pineapple kush.
No, that would have to be miniature.
Wow.
That's so silly. It's literally all weed. So
it's all the same. Yeah. And that's the thing that I think kills me is, all right, so they smelt it and it smelled sort of like cherries. So they decided to name it something cherry related. Now suddenly it goes into a totally different category than like GG4, which isn't a fruit, isn't a flavor. It's that would be allowed to be in any size that you want.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was like GG berry or whatever, I don't know, that wouldn't be allowed. GG strawberry, not allowed.
If they were to say, okay, no animals, then we couldn't call it Gorilla Glue.
For sure, yeah.
It's very silly, like Rachelle said. It reminds me of the limitations that they put on the medical market where they said, okay, you can't actually tell us what the strain is. You have to call it black or red or...
Oh, yeah, tangerine.
Okay. And so it's unfortunate because I think we could learn from the lack of interest in some of these products or like the constrictions around marketing these products, and it's inauthentic. And so if it's inauthentic or if it's limiting, then we're just cutting off the potential for success in the industry in certain cases around fruity strains.
Yeah. I mean, Rachelle, you've been in more industries than I have. Have you seen other states that say, if this sounds fruity or sounds like something that might be appealing to children, you can't label it that way?
Yeah, they tried to pass a similar provision in California last year, and it went further actually than this. It was also banning, any sort of like cartoon-ish character or any sort of packaging that could be deemed appealing to kids. So any certain colors, right? It went actually much further, and that failed. And I certainly hope this one does too, because it's super arbitrary. I'd like to know the person who introduced this provision. It's very silly. I could definitely see the artificial synthetic natural flavor ban going through, but the packaging requirement, to me, it's just silly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's inauthentic. So what it's going to happen is like we're just going to have to come up with different names for the strains, like, or they're just going to be nicknamed.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm waiting to see is like maybe instead of cherries, you have like CHERY, because that's not the same word.
Or pineapple kush is PA kush.
Yeah, like I think we're going to see people adapt to it if this does end up getting introduced. But it's just insane to think about like, all right, someone sat in a room and said, well, it's safe if it's 6-point font, but 7-point font, that's just ridiculous. And
who is this clown?
It makes me want to crinkle up this sheet of paper and throw it away.
Well, and what I think is so funny is well, not funny. It would be funny if this wasn't actually potentially impacting people. But what is funny is that we have this huge cannabis reform bill going through the Senate and House right now. We have the people that we deem experts in our state on this reviewing legislation, talking about changes, and then some other people said, oh, also we should include this. I mean, if we were really looking to introduce this as an important measure, why didn't it get introduced into the other main cannabis bill that we've been working on for months? It's sort of looking like it's just trying to like back end its way into, oh, and I guess this bill affects us too.
Yeah, so if you're a big fan of this bill, reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, who are you?
I don't know who I am anymore, Rachelle.
We had people write in and say, guys, you just don't talk about legislation enough. We really just wish that you talked about the government more. And so this episode is for you.
And thanks to our special guest, Rachelle Gordon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, guys. It's an honor to be here, honestly.